Welcome to Bilahdan. Today we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court nominee. Trump came out of his coma and, start his freak show. After announcing tested positive for COVID, dramatic joyride to the hospital, Marine One helicopters and doctors that look like a TV show. They don't, not really doctor, but they play one on televisions. And later, he's coming out like a hero, second amendment, second coming. His supporters are treating him like Jesus. Second coming and the Messiah and the one who is gonna cure us all. And then in the midst of all of this, there is a nomination of a Supreme Court of Amy Coney Barrett, judge. Her history of biased and culture and religious interference and her philosophy and ideology. So we'll see how all this is gonna play out and if this is actually gonna take place because everybody's touching Trump in the last few weeks has been tested positive. Congress is the one who are going to oversee this nomination and overseeing the hearing, also testing positive. So very interesting, the debate between Kamala Harris and Pence last night. I haven't seen it. All I know there was just a fly on Pence's head. So, well, it's a freak show. It's a circus. We have guests today that they're gonna shed some sanity on this. Peter Thomason is a criminal defense lawyer, a private. He's retired now, but he was a criminal lawyers and also public defender for United States District Court, the District of Minnesota. Assistant United States Attorney, District of Minnesota, and will be joining by another guest who has a very, interesting background of history of the Supreme Justice. So we also talking to Ken. Hi, Peter.
Hi, Ahmed. How are you?
Safe and healthy, or what?
Yes, we're all safe and healthy. I'm home. I'm used to this kind of Zoom performances because I'm teaching now on Zoom. So I'm getting this idea as to how to teach the law with 30 people with just a screen in front of my face.
So, what are the students, interested? Been doing this for a while since your retirement, and what are the changes that we seen through the years? Their interests, are they interested in career or justice, or what kind of student we have now?
Encouraged by the students. I think they are very interested in justice. That's a great question. One of the things that gets in the way of that is the expense of education now. And so oftentimes when the students are graduating, they have quite a bit of debt. And so some of them who would rather maybe just go into nonprofits or public defense or public prosecution or things like that end up going into large firms or corporations so they can make more money and pay off their student debt.
Well, it is a case all around, not just the lawyers. I think leverage your skill, leverage your intellect to meet all these means of modern life. Everybody wants a new car, a new house, iPhone, iPod, build pay the debts. So I don't know if in other ways that people can actually follow their dreams and follow their actual desire and passion of helping others and helping environment, the community, the underprivileged. But what do they teach them in law school? I mean, isn't it the idea of law and justice is to help and represent the voiceless or the people underrepresented, or you just represent anybody guilty of some sort?
It's a good question. Maybe just to fill out the last thing we talked about, I don't mean to say that working for justice and taking a job where you get some money are mutually exclusive, because a lot of the young lawyers can do pro bono work through their firms or through their corporations and fulfill some of their obligations that way.
So you represent even if you are a corporate lawyer and making millions of dollars, but also you can represent some of like a public defender, or you can take a case that that the victims or the cannot afford it.
Right. And you can get involved with different .orgs, and you can get involved. There are various organizations that do specific legal work. There's the Children's Law Center that represents kids that are in juvenile court because of neglect and abuse by the parents. There's Minnesota Advocates, which is a group that...
Well, I just want to welcome Ken Peterson here. Finally, he's with us now, and welcome, Ken. Very nice of you to give us your time. I know I asked for like a little bio about your background, and could you, instead of reading it from your LinkedIn or something, could you give us a little bit some background about your career, your history? I know you are retired now, and you're doing good work after retirement.
Now, it's a pleasure to be here this morning, so thank you for asking me. I graduated from law school almost 50 years ago, and I've spent the first few years of my career working on the Indian reservation, then doing environmental law. And after that, for off and on for 30 some years, I spent working with various government agencies, the Minnesota Attorney General's office, which I was a deputy attorney general, and the city of St. Paul as chief of staff to the mayor, and with the state of Minnesota as commissioner of labor and industry. And so much of my career was tied up with government and as an advocate.
Okay, well, welcome both. I'm flattered that you have both of those caliber, and I don't know what I'm doing with you guys, and I'm just trying to do my best. But I've just let you talk, and I'm just gonna listen because I really don't have anything to offer as far as our Supreme Court and the role the Supreme Court played in our civil society and our history. And when we look at and we start with you, Ken, because I think you have some historical background of the Supreme Court. When you look at the main purpose of the Supreme Court, it was the highest federal legal court, overseeing everything and monitoring the executive branch, what's happening in the White House, what they do, and also overseeing what's happening in Congress. So some kind of overseeing all of this, and the idea was good. We give, I think they start with 6 judges, and now they are 9, I think, and we give them a lifetime. They are higher until they die or retire. Then nation of the Supreme Court that are going to take RBG place, that she died a few weeks ago, is Amy Coney Barrett, and she's a very interesting figure. And it seems like in the last few years, the Supreme Court becoming more politicized, and the idea of impartiality is really been tarnished, and the very purpose of the Supreme Court itself is not as innocent and as it used to be. So how did that happen through the years, Ken? And such idea, you have those mullah nine mullah, ayatollah sitting in the Supreme Court. They can't touch them. They can interpret everything.
Yeah, we have our three branches of government: the executive branch and the legislative branch, both of which are often called the political branches, because they're the ones that make policy or execute policy. And the role of the judiciary is to make the tough decisions when people can't otherwise decide them. You take them to court, and I think there are a number of things that have happened over the years, though, with the court, and a lot of it with first of all, just a lifetime appointments. We should remember that when the Constitution was written in the 1780s, a lifetime wasn't nearly as long as it is now. So we did have a lot more people. A lifetime was basically a form of keeping your income. We did not have people living into their 80s, 90s as often as we do now, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg staying on the court till she's 87. That was highly unusual in those days. So lifetime wasn't that long. So it was a lot more
interesting
movement of judges. We should always recall that. And that's nothing to do with the politics. And the second thing, I do think that we've, since the 1970s or 80s, a lot of corporate interests and wealthy interests have been very concerned about they were very concerned about the steps taken by the so-called Warren Court from the 1940s to the 1970s, or the Roosevelt Warren Court, which is a more liberal bench. And now so they've taken a greater interest. They set up basically a farm system revolving around something called the Federalist Society and other groups that encourage, that send certain judges along, certain individuals, certain lawyers up, set them up to be judges. And like, for example, if Judge Barrett becomes a member of the Supreme Court, 3 of the 9 judges will be members of the Republican team defending George Bush in 2000 in the contested election of that time. So each of those 3 have been very involved with down in the trenches of dealing with politics. And that's been a major change. I think at one time we tried to pick people that were more a little more open to new ideas and different ideas.
Peter, when you look at the issue that in the front of us now that the Supreme Court might get involved in, like, we're looking at the Affordable Act, we look at the LGBT, abortion. Those are social. There are some social and cultural issue, but the Affordable Act, it is almost a human right issue. And the Supreme Court got involved. There was election, with Bush, almost both unelected, nominee to run the country for 8 years.
I think one of the biggest issues, and you've kind of touched on it, but I'd like to go into it a little more, is the credibility of the court.
Yes.
Because when you talk about all these different issues and biases of the judges or their backgrounds, their kind of social status, it gets to be very confusing, because what the court is supposed to do is interpret the law. And if you interpret the law, you are supposed to be basically using your legal intellect to do so, not your social disposition or your religious views. So it's very tricky. Some of the people want to appoint judges or elect congresspeople or elect a president that has a certain view on an issue that is reflected by their religious views. Abortion is a big one. And, I read a great book by a husband and wife team that had no really personal position about abortion, but they just studied the whole process. And they said what happened after Roe versus Wade is that there really was now an excessive use of the court for these kinds of hot buttoned issues. And it's a real problem. And the real credibility of the court, I think it was really damaged the greatest when they undertook that presidential election case out of Florida. And I think, when the public looks at their performance in that case, first of all, they didn't even need to take that case. It really was beyond the ken of the court. I don't know why they took the case, but it came out 5 Republicans voting against 4 Democrats. And so the whole idea of the credibility of the court to be an interpreter of the law began to get sullied into, these people are political in nature, and therefore, they're going to make decisions that are political. So I think that's a big problem. And I think in many ways now, with this nomination fight and other nominations fights that there have been in the past and political questioning, it's really coming to the forefront, and the public is going to be watching closely. And I don't really see a really good outcome for this idea of the court's reputation with the public as a result of these fights. I don't know. What do you think, Ken?
I agree. I think I think the credibility of all our government institutions is at stake nowadays. But I think the courts are probably the most vulnerable position, because the courts have generally been considered as a last resort, the last decision maker. And if we can't count on them looking at problems from a fair point of view, from an unbiased point of view, then how can we judge fairness in our society? We won't be able to. And so I'm very concerned about this.
Is it possible, or we're just being very idealistic? Is there a such thing as being really objective without seeing or as Peter said, your own interpretation, your own dogma? I mean, when you look at Amy, when she was doing her in 2016, 26, doing commencement for Notre Dame, telling the students, she was saying that the law is a means to an end. And the end is always the kingdom of God. I mean, that is very damaging. Sounds like an Ayatollah, something Ayatollah said in Iran.
It's shocking. I agree, that's shocking, and that I think the current composition of the court is perhaps too much like Judge Barrett. That their views are very similar to hers. I'm not sure. I don't know if they have the same type of religious faith, but they do have this sort of ideological viewpoint of the world, which does lead them to make the same sort of decisions, come out with the same sort of rulings on the issues over time. Like right now, came up with a figure that the Roberts Court, since he's been the Chief Justice, has ruled 76% of the time in favor of corporations when they're up against an individual, and that's higher than any other court in the 50 years it's been studied. So it just they're tipping far too far one way. And I think they may be tipping too far on other issues as well, as corporate power and more power, giving more power to the wealthy. But they are going that way, and I'm afraid this will hurt the credibility of the court and the credibility of our institutions and our democracy.
Peter, do you think the Supreme Court outlived itself, or at least that life appointee, or not having a term limits also outlived itself?
One change I think I would be in favor of would be to have some kind of term limit for a couple of reasons. One, which Ken already gave, is that the original founders, weren't anticipating people being on the court so darn long. Another reason being, it's just good to get new blood in from time to time. And a third reason, what we've been talking about here, I mean, a big political motivation right now is to get in people with certain views, political views, onto the court who are very young. And so that those views will be entrenched for a long period of time. And if you had some term limits, that would address some of those problems. Now, getting it through would be a constitutional amendment, and that would be a highly political process. And you can see, how difficult those things are to accomplish. But just conceptually, I think term limits could be a wise alternative.
Ken, the president nominate the Supreme Court judge. The Congress oversee and have a hearing. The Congress also can be, I know it's elected position, but they can be there for 4 years or the same. We have the same problem at the Senate, at the Congress. Should we have also term limits on the people who overseen the process of selecting a Supreme Court?
I'm not so sure. I could see the argument. The senators that will be the Senate Judiciary Committee will be meeting on Judge Barrett's confirmation, and some of those members have been in the office for 30 years, and that's a real long time, and probably too long for anybody. But I'm not sure at what point for elected official that you set a term limit, like how long, and shouldn't at least in their case they go to the voters. They have to, each one of those elected officials who's been in office for 20 or 30 years, they have to return to the voters each time. With judges, they don't have to. I certainly understand the need for it. I'm kind of neutral on this whole idea of term limits for elected officials, because I've done a certain amount of work with, particularly in our legislature and in Congress, and have worked with some of these members that have been in office a long time, and some of them are very good, and some of them have just been there too long and should move on. And so I'm just not sure what's the right path.
I get it. Well, we could have like a litmus test, like we'll ask Congress after 30 years, do you know where the bathroom is? And then if he doesn't, he's out. Peter, seriously, Trump was almost impeached. He was impeached by the House. Should an impeached president nominate a Supreme Court judge?
Well, the problem is an impeached president is still the president, if the Senate hasn't convicted him. And so he doesn't have any legal disability, and therefore he can appoint. One thing amongst all this doom and gloom we're talking about, I want to raise, just to get the viewers, a little different perspective. Earl Warren's name has already come up. And the Warren Court was one of the courts that, interpreted the Constitution and various statutes in a way to greatly expand civil liberties. And so it's thought of as a very liberal court. Let me just give you a little anecdote. Earl Warren not only was appointed by a Republican president, he was the Attorney General of the state of California, and he was, much to his embarrassment, the person who lobbied Congress to set up the Japanese internments. He wrote about it later in his life, and he said, this is the biggest mistake I ever made in my life. But there's a Republican, and if he was being vetted right now, with that in his background, there would be a huge political storm. And nevertheless, when he got on the court, he presided over one of the greatest expansions of our individual liberties, in the history of the court. And so things like this happen. Another example is David Souter, who is recently retired from the court. And there was a tremendous political push to get him on the court because everyone believed he would overturn Roe versus Wade. all the evangelicals were very much in favor of Souter going on the court. He went on the court and he became a brilliant judge and quite a liberal judge. He voted with Ginsburg most of the time. And he really acquitted himself brilliantly on the court. And so there is this almost mystique or idea that has been popular from time to time that the court, once that black robe gets on, you know, some people have the fortitude to leave political biases and backgrounds behind and actually decide cases on the basis of the merits, how they should be decided.
You know, that sounds very nice and all, but, you know, we cannot build a system hoping some of those guys will be there. We have no way of doing that. We need the system that, as you say, credibility. We don't even have to raise those anecdotes. But Ken, you know, when you look at the you know, if the law is going to be interpreted by those judges, the 9 judges, and their culture, philosophy, dogma is going to seep in, even knowing or not knowing. When you look at the, you know, slavery was legal, the internment of Japanese was legal, wars was legal. So this major issue that obvious to any layman, this is horrible things, it was legal by the very Supreme Court. So I know we can hear a good story about judge that transformed his moral thing, but I mean, Supreme Court also, at the end of the day, is going to interpret the law.
I don't think that we ought to say that, to necessarily say that today is things are just gone to hell. And in the past, we had some sort of wonderful golden era of fairness in judging. Because you raised the point of slavery. That was in I believe it was 1857. Roger Taney was been the Chief Justice for about 20 years at that time, ruled in the so-callred Dred Scott case that Congress could not pass a law restricting the ability of citizens to have slavery, to own slaves. And that was really, but we look back at Taney's background, turns out he was born to a prominent Maryland slaveholding family. And although he did own slaves at various times, he himself owned slaves at various times in his life, but he didn't own them at the time he made his decision. But at the same time, this was a man who was surrounded by slavery, and he believed in it. And that decision helped prompt the Civil War, which, you know, there were over 1 million casualties of Americans who were either killed or wounded in that war. So the courts, we shouldn't say the courts have always been right, but they do bring their own prejudices onto court, and they will act on those same prejudices, their biases, and whatever their background was born into them. I think Worrell Warren was a remarkable individual, and Souter is too. And another thing about Souter that Peter mentioned, Souter had the wisdom to quit the court after about 20 years. Didn't stay on forever. Just thought that he had done enough and moved on. And I'd like to see more judges do that.
What a concept.
Yeah,
Peter, let's end this.
Thanks later. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Thank you, Ken. It was good meeting you.
You.
Thank you.